Hello YouTube, welcome to Card Combo Show episode 46 with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. You may recognise that there's been a bit of a change behind me. I'm joined now by Geralt and Dragon from Skyrim, whose name I forget, Alduin, and still got Knuckles there and the Master Sword, and good old Bobby Corwin, but got the boxes for my Dissidia NT, the ill-fated Dissidia NT PlayStation. Anyway, this week we're going to be looking at the best Final Fantasy of all and its horribly misrepresented cards, Final Fantasy VIII. Let's get to it. So this week I'm going to be looking at Seifer, or Seifer, however you want to pronounce it. I say Seifer because the way I've always seen it is in German you say Ein, and that's spelled E-I-N. I'm sure there's spellings for words I said either way, but Seifer, I'm saying Seifer. Irvine from Opus 13, Diablos, or Diablo, or Diabolos, or whatever, from Opus 6, Quistis from Opus 2, and Moomba from Opus 2. Cool. So first and foremost, Seifer. He's a 3-cost 6k forward with the text, when Seifer blocks or is blocked, choose one forward opponent controls. It loses 2,000 power until the end of the turn. When Seifer deals damage to your opponent, all the forwards opponent controls lose 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So he was, at release, an okay card. His throne has definitely been usurped by the likes of Light Rain, given that that's minus 2,000 just on attack, which is, really good, and that's also plus 2,000 to your forwards as well. But still, he is a seed candidate. Alas, he is not a seed. Poor him. And he's in a category 8 card as well, which means he may have some other synergies down the line. So first and foremost, a Bunker Beast. So choose one blocking forward, it loses 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So obviously, if your opponent blocks a forward, it loses 2,000 power, and then you can further use Bunker Beast to minus 2,000 power again. So if it is only a 4k forward, it gets put into the break zone. If not, Seifer's probably surviving. I mean, again, he has a fairly low power, and I think the point is that his effect is meant to kind of, work against the fact he has low power, but really that makes him an okay card, not a good card. I wouldn't even say it makes him a good card, but still, it's Seifer and I like Final Fantasy, so nah. Chalinka, so having it so that he could attack twice, it could be interesting. Again, Rain can do this anyway, but if you are able to have it so that Seifer can attack twice and actually deal damage to your opponent, that would mean that all your opponent's forwards lose 4,000 power, which is decent enough. Now if you combine that with the likes of Zemus, it means that regardless of your opponent having a forward to block with, Seifer can still push through, and this is the one thing where Rain wouldn't be able to work, because obviously Zemus being a dark card and Rain being light. So you can have it so that Seifer cannot be blocked, deals damage to your opponent, minus 2,000 to your opponent's board, he attacks again because of Chalinka, and minus 4,000, and then you can compound that with something like, I don't know, casting Cyclops. There's also Ninja as well. Now, obviously, this is over 3 elements. Definitely doable regardless. But Ninja also works just fine with Seifer anyway, because you can attack with Seifer, deal 5k to something, then if your opponent blocks with that forward, they'll then be minus 2. So that's a total of a 7k swing to one forward, which is fine. And if your opponent doesn't block, then again, that forward will still minus 2k, which will hopefully kill it. But obviously, with Chalinka as well, it means that Seifer would attack twice, and you'd get 2 procs from the Ninja effect, which means that you deal 5k to 2 different things, or 10k to 1, and obviously got Seifer's ability as well. And then you got No and Barreleye. So obviously you'd use so Seifer would attack, No would proc, which would then reactivate a backup, which would then proc Barreleye, and Barreleye would then deal 3k to your opponent's board. And then you've obviously got Seifer dealing damage, or not dealing damage, reducing power, sorry, with his attack or block effect as well. What's also decent is that Seifer actually minus 2,000 when he blocks as well. So if you are able to give Seifer a bit more power, then he's a decent blocker as well, I guess. But yeah, obviously, if you were to add Chalinka into the mix with this as well, it means that Seifer could attack twice. You could reactivate 2 backups, which would give you 2 Barreleye procs, which would deal 6k to your opponent's board, and provided Seifer cannot be blocked, would then minus 2,000 to your opponent's board and you could do that twice as well. So really, if you had Baralai, No, Seifer, Chilinka, and Zemus on the field, then you could deal 2 points of unblockable damage to your opponent's field, deal 6k damage in total, and minus 4,000 damage to their board, which would be a total of a 10k swing to their board, and you will have dealt 2 points of damage, which isn't the worst. Rain, yeah, I mean, I had to say it anyway. So chances are you would attack with Rain first, that'd be minus 2,000 to your opponent's board, and Seifer would then become bigger, which is good. And then you can attack with Seifer, and regardless if it gets blocked by a forward or deals 2k to your opponent's board, a forward will lose 4,000 power, which is decent. And again, compound that with Chilinka, probably on Rain at this point, you could do a total of minus 6 to your opponent's board. And you could then cast Cyclops, which would then actually be a total of minus 9 to your opponent's board, which is likely to kill a lot of things. And Yuna, so Yuna obviously can use her payment ability of pay 0 to then become lightning, and she can then party attack with Seifer, which would then be minus 8k to something, and then if they still get blocked, Seifer's ability would trigger, which means that would then be a further minus 2k to something. So that's pretty good, minus 10k to a forward your opponent controls. And if your opponent, say your opponent's got 1 point of damage until they die, and then you can only block with 1 forward, but it is a big forward, then Yuna and Seifer party attacking, and then blocked with Seifer is actually good. Alright, Irvine, 2 CP, 5k forward, with the text put Irvine into the break zone, choose 1 forward, deal it 5,000 damage, or at damage 5, put Irvine into the break zone, choose 1 forward, deal 9,000 damage. So he's like a better version of VIII from Opus 3, I believe. Just put into the break zone, deal a decent amount of damage. Some people get annoyed by the fact that he is a job sniper and not seed candidate, but at the point you meet him in, sorry, spoilers for Final Fantasy VIII, at the point you meet him, he isn't any longer a seed candidate. He is a fully fledged seed, so he wouldn't be a seed candidate. And if they were to have made it so that cards synergize with seeds rather than seed candidates, it would mean the likes of Seifer wouldn't be applied to that because he never becomes a seed. Again, spoilers for Final Fantasy VIII, sorry. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. I obviously love Final Fantasy VIII. So there, you can put Irvine into the break zone, deal hopefully 9k to a forward opponent controls. You then cast Phoenix to bring him back. That's also 2,000 to your opponent's board, and then you can put Irvine into the break zone again and deal 9k to something else. So it's a total of 11k to do different things if you're at damage 5, but also you can obviously just do this on your opponent's turn as well. So they attack with something, cast Phoenix, bring in Irvine, you can block with Irvine and then put him into the break zone to deal damage to another forward as well. If your opponent's got a couple of forwards they could attack with. Amadar, so when a forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, double the power of Amadar until the end of the turn. So obviously he's naturally an 8,000 power forward, so being able to put Irvine into the break zone, deal 9k something, and then making Amadar 16,000 power is pretty good. Obviously you can buff Amadar as well so that he becomes even bigger. What you're going to do with that power, I don't know, but at least that makes him an indomitable attacking forward. Edward, during your opponent's attack phase, when a forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. So this is a horrible little thing, but you could have Irvine and VIII on your field and then go to your opponent's attack phase, because they have to pass through their attack phase. You can't just go, oh, I'm going straight to main phase 2 and then playing cards. They have to go through main phase 1, attack phase, main phase 2. So when they go through attack phase, you can be like, before you enter your main phase 2, I'm just going to put Irvine into the break zone. And then they have to discard a card because Edward's text. And then you can do that with VIII as well, which would mean that they'd have to discard again. You could then cast Phoenix and bring Irvine back onto the field, or VIII back onto the field, and then put them into break zone again. And your opponent will have to discard again. Obviously, you need a forward to target with Irvine's ability, but still, regardless, Edward is getting to discard, and for hopefully if you're breaking something with Irvine and you're making your opponent discard, that's quite effective. Ramza, when a forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, activate Ramza, which you can then combine with his Dull to either give something haste, or Dull and choose 1 forward, it gains plus 1,000 power. And again, you can use this on your opponent's turn, so your opponent could attack something, you could block with Irvine, put Irvine in the break zone to reactivate Ramza, and hopefully broke another forward with Irvine, and then you can use Ramza to maybe give a forward that's got an activated ability haste, or just give another blocking or forward that you want to block with plus 1,000 power. And it's worth noting that Ramza can give himself plus 1,000 power if he wanted. Megissa. So if you deal Megissa at 4,000 damage or more, and provided you don't kill her, then you can actually search a fire forward of 3 or less and play it onto the field. Actually, no, sorry. It's just of cost 3. So not 3 or less, cost 3. So it has to be cost 3. Apologies. So yeah, you just put Irvine into the break zone. And even though you're at damage 5, you don't have to use that specific ability. So you can, even at damage 6, be like, okay, I'm going to put Irvine into the break zone and deal 5,000 damage to Megissa. Because Irvine states, just choose one forward, deal 5,000 damage. So you can do that with Megissa. Megissa can then search you something like Forza, play it onto the field. And again, you can do this on your opponent's turn. So you could block with Irvine, put Irvine in the break zone, choose Megissa. Megissa then brings in Forza. Forza deals 7k to something, and then you've also got a Forza to block with as well. Or, what you could do, is use Beigen. So Beigen has a similar ability. So when Beigen is dealt 4,000 damage or more, you may put Beigen into the break zone, or when you do so, deal 7,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls. So you will ultimately be sacking both Irvine and Beigen to get this effect off. But if your opponent's got a lot of forwards, it may be worth it. And what I like about this as well is that you can use Manasvin Warmech. So you put Irvine into the break zone, deal 5k to Beigen. You then go to put Beigen into the break zone. But before you do that, you use Manasvin Warmech on Beigen to make it so that the damage he deals is increased by 2,000. At which point Beigen will deal 9k to your opponent's board, which is pretty good. And then obviously you put Beigen into the break zone once he's had the damage dealt to him. And, you know, getting rid of Irvine and Beigen to deal that much damage to your opponent's field is fine, I think. If Beigen has got you an attack off, like the longer Irvine and Beigen are on the field and the more attacks or blocks or whatever they get off, then the better value they become. And Beigen is a decent blocker, to be fair. If your opponent has forwards that can't get past Beigen, and if you have something like C card, which reduces the damage Beigen would take, then that would actually be decent as well, because Beigen becomes an even more effective blocker and more likely to take either no damage or damage to be able to put Beigen breaks in to then break your opponent's field. Diablos. So choose one forward. Its power becomes 4,000 until the end of the turn. Draw one card. Fine summon, it gets you a card to hand, which is good, and also just a forward's power becomes 4,000. So what's important here is that, say you've got a forward that has, I don't know, it's a 7k forward, but then it's got a 3k buff applied to it. If you were to use Diablos, that would make it become 4,000 power. Then obviously it would gain those buffs. So Zangetsu, a forward that never gets played, but to be fair, paying 1 lightning and a dull, choose one forward, deal at 4,000 damage isn't the worst actually. It's a decent amount of damage to be able to deal something for just 1 lightning and a dull. And it means that you could cast Diablos, set something to 4, use Zangetsu, break it. Terror. So when Terror enters the field, choose one summon, add it to your hand, and then when you cast someone, choose one forward your opponent controls, deal it 2,000 damage. So you would cast Diablos, deal 2k to a forward your opponent controls, and then that forward would become 4,000 power, so it's nearly dead. Obviously, if you combine this with the likes of Manasvin Warmech, that would mean that you could use Manasvin on Terror, and then cast Diablos, at which point Terror would deal 4k, something your opponent controls, and then that forward would become 4k power, so it would just pop and die, because Terror's dealing 4, its power's becoming 4, yay. Similar sort of thing as well with Rain, so you could attack with, you could cast Diablos to set it to 4, Terror deals 2k ping, and then you attack with Rain, at which point, you know, it's only got 2,000 power until that forward dies. Rain minus 2,000 power. Cuchulain. Choose one forward until the end of the turn. It loses 1,000 power for each card in your hand. If its power has become 0 or less by the previous effect, draw 1 card. So you'd want to cast Diablos first to make it 4,000 power, and then, you know, Diablos gets you a card to hand anyway. And then you cast Cuchulain, and provided you have 4 cards left in hand after casting Cuchulain, you would then set it to 0 power, which means that it would then actually just get put into the break zone. So again, if it's a forward that cannot be broken, doesn't matter because it's technically a rule processing. If a forward's power becomes 0, put it into the break zone, and then Cuchulain would also draw you a card as well. Now you could combine this with the likes of Ash. So you would have cast Diablos, then you cast Cuchulain, and then you cast Ash onto the field. You have cast 3 cards this turn, draw 1 card at the end of your turn, and also Diablos and Cuchulain both got you cards as well. Quistis. When Quistis enters the field, you may play 1 water forward of cost 3 or less from your hand onto the field. The forwards of cost 2 or less you control gain 1,000 power, and she is a 5 CP 7k forward, so quite a bit under par, but she has some decent abilities, I think. Now, she tends to get usurped by cards like Dusk, or maybe Strago. You know, there's plenty of cards where they bounce something and then play something onto the field, or just they play something onto the field regardless, as you have to pay an additional cost. But I think the fact that it's just Quistis can play a water forward of 3 or less, doesn't matter, you don't have to do anything additional, it's just Quistis into forward is fine. And ultimately Quistis can power up any smaller forwards as well. But you could, you know, pay for Quistis to then bring in something like Dusk. You could pay the 1 water, and then Dusk can bring in something else, which is fine. That is a total of 6 CP to play Quistis, Dusk, and something else. 6 CP, I mean, that's 2 CP per forward, basically. And provided what those forwards are, that's pretty good. Cagnazzo. So if Cagnazzo receives damage during your opponent's turn, the damage is reduced by 4,000 instead, so that's a fine ability. But when Cagnazzo enters the field, until the end of the turn, all the forwards your opponent controls lose 1,000 power for every 2 water characters you control, which is weird. Now, this guy used to get played a lot back in Opus 3, and for a few Opuses after that. The typical play was play Cagnazzo, scholar him back to your hand, replay Cagnazzo, and hopefully get a board wipe on your opponent's field. But, you don't need to do that as much these days, because there's a lot more board-wide effects, but still, playing Quistis into Cagnazzo means that you do increase your field by 2 water forwards, or water characters, when you play Cagnazzo, so that means that will immediately be minus 1k additional to any other water characters you control. And then you got the new Cagnazzo as well. So if you would have got Cagnazzo on the field, you could play Quistis into something else, which would then immediately give Cagnazzo 2 water counters. Now, if you were to play Quistis into something like Dusk and then something else, that would actually mean that you get 3 on Cagnazzo immediately, and then you can minus 8k one of your opponent's forwards. I think this Cagnazzo is a bit better because whilst it isn't targeted, or whilst it isn't a board-wide effect immediately, you do get to target one thing and it's minus 8k, which I think generally is better. Freya. Obviously, multicolour cards a thing now, and Freya, while she's only a 2 CP forward, she can still be played by Quistis because it's player forward of 3 or less, and you can bring in Freya. Freya can then either draw your card or choose an active forward and deal at 4k, but ultimately, Freya is, whilst only a 2 CP forward, 7k power, and with Quistis on the field, she actually comes in 8k forward, which is really good. Sophie, similar sort of thing, but for each water forward other than Sophie controls, Sophie gains plus 2,000 power, and Sophie also being a 2 CP forward means that she also gains a +1 from Quistis as well. But you could already have Sophie on the field, and then you can play Quistis into Dusk, into something else, and Sophie then immediately gain +7, which is pretty substantial, and your opponent's going to take a point of damage in return unless they can do something about all those forwards. Obviously, Quistis can play Sophie onto the field as well, but generally you'll be wanting to use Quistis to buff or increase your field so that Sophie can deal a point of damage. Une, so obviously Flickering Quistis is pretty decent, and this is why I like Quistis over the likes of something like Strago, because Strago is dependent on the forward your opponent controls that you bounce, whereas Quistis is just a case of, if it's a water forward and it costs 3 or less, play it onto the field. So maybe you've attacked once with Quistis, or your opponent's got no forwards, and you just want to, you know, get another forward out there, then casting just a cheap summon, something obviously 3 CP or less, or even if it's not 3 CP or less, if you're getting lots of effects off by casting a summon, Flickering Quistis, and then bring another forward in to do a lot of things, I think that's pretty decent. Now obviously Une will be an ice, which means that you are probably going to be water ice, and Quistis can only bring in water forwards, so you need to be careful of that, but still it could just be a water deck with some spicy ice. Either way, I think that's a fair trade-off to be able to keep on Flickering Quistis every other turn, or yeah, every one of your turns, sorry, to be able to bring in water forwards. And if you've got lots of 3 or 2 CP water forwards, definitely worth it. And finally, Moomba. Laguna! Sorry, that was awful. That's kind of what I always thought they sound like in my head, which, really, I don't like the sound of now that I'm not a child. So yeah, Moomba, a 2 CP EX summon with the text, choose 1 forward, deal it damage equal to its power minus 1,000. So I've always loved this summon. I think it's still good today as well. And you combine it with the likes of Seifer, it means that your opponent blocks or something, and you know, Seifer's effect would stack. There, you know, your opponent's happy to take that minus 2,000. You can then cast something like Moomba. If it's, I don't know, being blocked by a 10k forward, that forward will take 9k damage, and then Seifer will minus 2,000, so then it's only an 8k forward, that's taken 9. It's gonna die. Similar sort of thing with Terra as well. So if a forward is dealt damage by your summon, the damage increased by 2,000 instead. So regardless of what happens here, you cast Moomba, provided your opponent can't kill Terra before Moomba's damage resolves, it doesn't matter what they do to their own forwards. Well, actually it does matter, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Unless they can make it so that their forwards take 2,000 damage less, Moomba is going to be overflowing the damage of their power by 1. So it will, if it's dealing damage to a 10,000 power forward, it will be dealing 11. If it's dealing damage to a 2,000 power forward, it will be dealing 3. And I think that's pretty good. I mean, technically, if you are using Moomba on a 1,000 power forward, Moomba will deal 0 damage, which is pretty funny. But with Terra, it would actually technically deal 2. But it's another way to make it so that Moomba is a guaranteed kill. And then you've got the other Terra as well. So Terra obviously deals 2k damage on top of Moomba. So provided your opponent doesn't have a Minwu effect or damage, I'm going to call it regen, but provided they don't have an effect where if a forward takes no damage from damage less than its power. Oh, that was a tongue twister, but you know what I mean. Terra and Moomba together will kill. There's a fun little combo here, including Une. Now, technically, you only really need Terra and Une to get this. It's not an infinite loop, but a loop off nonetheless. It's to cast a summon, and then you flicker Terra using Une's ability. Terra can then search you or get you a summon from your break zone back to hand. Now, if you have the same summon in your break zone as the summon you've just cast, then you can get that same summon back to hand. Now, why I look Moomba with this is because Terra and Moomba together is an instant, well, should be an instant break. And if you've got a Moomba already in your break zone, and you cast Moomba with Terra on the field and Une on the field, you can break something, and then flicker Terra to get Moomba back to hand. And then your next turn, you can do the exact same thing. You can cast Moomba, hopefully break something, flicker Terra to then get the first Moomba back to hand, and just keep on rinsing. If you've got, 2 or 3 Moombas, obviously you're going to increase your chance of being able to do that. Well, you can't do it with only 1 Moomba, so it would have to be at least 2. But yeah, just being able to, every turn, be able to cast Moomba to be able to then hopefully break something. Again, this doesn't work if they have a Minwu effect, but I still think that's hilarious. And then, obviously, Kuchaspel, so that would actually get rid of the problematic Minwu effect. It does mean that you are effectively increasing Moomba's cost by 3 every turn, but if it's guaranteeing you a kill on a forward every turn, pretty good. And finally, Tiny Little Chocobo. This is more just to talk about the fact that it doesn't matter how big of a forward you have power-wise. If you're casting Moomba, you only need it to have 1k power, because it will be blocking for that forward's entire power. Cool, there we go, folks. Final Fantasy VIII. There's a lot of, well, I say a lot of discussion. There is reasonable amount of discussion about the fact that Final Fantasy VIII is not necessarily underrepresented, just the fact that they keep on pumping out the same name cards like Noah and Squall and Laguna. And don't get me wrong, the Opus 13 Laguna is fantastic. Well, with the backup Squall anyway. And so is the Opus 13 Renoa. But there's a lot of good Final Fantasy VIII characters out there that they haven't really touched. And I know the same can be said for Final Fantasy VII, for example, but that game has got a stupid amount of representation. And I know technically you don't have Hojo yet, or I say technically you don't have Hojo yet, and there's only 1 Genova card. But Final Fantasy VIII has, like, well, I mean, there's no Sid Kramer, there's no Elone, she's a crucial card. There's just so many good Final Fantasy VIII characters. What about Watson's Own? Where are they? I don't know. See you guys in the next video.